Time. I want to thank you all for doing this. Good evening, everybody, and happy Thursday. We want to welcome on behalf of the Fishtown Kensington Area Business Improvement District. This is our first legislative update, and I always think it's important for all of our stakeholders, residents, business owners, to have an opportunity to meet who we are lucky to have as our elected officials, Senator Nikil Saval and Representative Mary Isaacson. And what's important is it's a way for us to hear what's going on in Harrisburg, their personal agendas, the thing that they're fighting for us. But more important, it's always great to know them as people. These are residents. These are people that care. They're a part of our community. And there's a lot that has gone into getting them to this point, which I think are pretty extraordinary. And I've always said what's wonderful about this district, really, it's the people here. The stories, like, for example, our good friend Paul Kimport is on. Hi, Paul. You know, what he has meant to Fishtown. And again, we are very lucky to have these two people fighting for us in Harrisburg. So the way we'll do this today, we'll first start with Senator Saval. I'll do a quick introduction, lead him through some question and answers. We're going to hold the public question Q&A until the very end. And then we'll do the same with the representative. And I know their time is very valuable, especially with budget season coming. So why don't we jump right in? Senator, thanks for joining us tonight. I guess we can't even call you a rookie anymore. Now you're a seasoned veteran up there.
Yeah, it's a year in, I guess. Yeah, but it's a little over a year. So I'm wizened at this point. I've lost hair and sleep and all that stuff.
I got you beat 3 times over. So one of the things, Senator, I think it's always great for people to know, obviously you were elected to office in 2020. You have a lovely wife, I bet your lovely wife, 2 boys. But to me, it's the background that brought you here that I think is pretty extraordinary. And what we see, and what I've certainly seen, both from watching you in the past and seeing you here now, is your belief and fight for working people, for people to have jobs, have good, stable jobs with benefits. And, you know, how did that, first of all, how did that passion in you ignite?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And thank you, Mark, just generally for your leadership of the bid. Thank you, Paul. Thank you to everyone, Randy, Kay, thank you everyone for being here. It's a real honor to be here with Rep. Isaacson, who I know shares that passion for and commitment to fighting for working people. So for me, it comes, I'm an Indian American. My parents moved to the United States in 1970. They've been married for 50 years. They've lived here longer than they lived in India, but they're small business owners. They had originally been in the sciences, but I grew up, they owned a pizza restaurant growing up. So I kind of grew up in and around the restaurant industry. I mean, a very small portion of it was like a small pizza shop. And so I always, we had people of a very diverse group of people who came in, a very diverse group of people who worked in the restaurant. Many of them immigrants who came to achieve on various levels of the citizenship spectrum. My parents secured status for everyone that needed it. So I grew up with this sense that we needed solidarity among immigrants, working class people of color, regardless of origin or status, and have carried that with me. Though I was a journalist by an academic and journalist by kind of profession, I always volunteered in and around the labor movement and just as a community organizer. So I worked with Unite Here, which represents hospitality workers. Here in Philadelphia, they represent workers in the stadiums, the airport, hotels, and also the school district of Philadelphia, as well as casinos out in Atlantic City, in the region. And that just being in a movement that really was about the kinds of jobs that the majority of Philadelphians, Black and brown Philadelphians, get in the city, which is overwhelmingly in the hospitality industry. That was really transformative for me. And then was part of the kind of progressive movement in the city, founded a progressive organization in 2016, ran for ward leader in South Philadelphia, and then ran for office kind of buoyed by, I think, the stuff, the desire to deliver more for working people and working class people in the city, and to advance, really strong policies that we, to represent those interests. And so but a lot of it starts, I guess, in my parents' restaurant.
And it's funny, we all have those things that spark us. So you make the decision to run. Now you can tell us this now because you're sitting in office, but for those of us who have done it and failed, and then of course we have you and Representative Isaacson, in those moments where you're sitting there with just your family, did you believe, I want to pull this off?
No, I would say that. You mean before I won? Did I?
Yes, before you won.
Yeah, no. Let's put it this way. I always thought I could win. I didn't think I was going to win. Let's just say that. I thought it was possible. You have to kind of think that that's possible. But it was towards the, I think even on the last day, I just really didn't know what had happened. And I think, the thing that it was very bewildering because there's one kind of campaign I expected to run, which was door knocking out with people, which is the joy of campaigning. I mean, it's exhausting and whatever, but it's like this great pretext for meeting tons of people across walks of life, as is politics and or elected office. And then the pandemic hit, right? And so our campaign I was in this basement where you see me now for months on end, or watching our toddler, and calling people on the phone, and that was the kind of just nature of the campaign. So it all felt kind of unreal in a certain sense. The only thing that felt real is how much people were going through, and you would suddenly call people on the phone and find out that they were in need. I mean, and so one of the things that we did as a campaign was to help connect people to mutual aid efforts, to deliver groceries, help pick up medication, and the like. And that was sort of the thing that kept us grounded during the campaign, which is a very brutal process.
And I have to ask, I had the pleasure of meeting your lovely wife at our June grand reopening celebration. I know the representative knows this, that the spouse of an elected official, whether it's campaign time or budget time or, anytime, time is sparse. How has she adapted to all of this? Before I ask how you are.
It has been, it is difficult. There's no question. I mean, we have two young kids. One of them is 3.5. One of them is about to turn 1 tomorrow.
Happy birthday.
That is, so I had a child in the last year, who, is present at basically was present at most events that I had to attend over the course of the last year in person. And, that has been tough. I mean, in a way, the pandemic is awful under every possible circumstance. The thing that has been easier, and for some people, and including myself, was the ability to be at home a lot. And so that made things easier. But I would say it's the time is tough, and it's just the time personally away is tough. And so I think that's balancing that has been difficult. But I would say that I love the job, and I think that I feel happy in it. I feel happier in this job than I have in really any other job I've had. And so I don't know. I hope I like to hope that I bring that sense of esprit de corps, I think, to the household and to what we're doing. But it's not easy. I mean, it's not an easy. And and Mary could speak to this as well. Has raised 2 kids over, and they're in college and high school, right? And so I think it's difficult, politics, and
it's a unique lifestyle. So you win the election, you take the oath of office, and I always ask this to folks. Mary had a different experience because she had been a longtime staffer, so she knew sort of what was coming for her. What did you expect, and how was it different when you started work?
So, what I expected to be the case, which has not been totally disproven, is that it would be a very difficult atmosphere to get legislation adopted, moved, passed, etc. Right? I mean that, and actually, I spoke to Rep. Isaacson early on about this and got a lot of kind of advice and counsel about what it would be like, which has all been, accurate in that sense. And so, but that said, I find that in a way, because it was helpful to know that, it was helpful to have an expectation about what was possible and what wasn't, or what traditional avenues might be closed off to you. The fact that you introduce a bill, it goes to a committee, it doesn't get a hearing, right? You're going to live with that. That is the most common experience for Democrats in the state legislature. But so just knowing that and trying to be creative and find ways around it to build relationships with people, but of course in one's own party, but across the aisle, that has been more possible and more salubrious and interesting than I would expect. I found it, and it's actually I find it like an incredibly intellectually rewarding environment. Delving into policy at every level has been completely just super satisfying. You can kind of get into any topic as deeply as you want. In fact, maybe not as deeply as you want, but it demands curiosity and satisfies curiosity. And that has been, I was a journalist. You sort of professional curiosity is required of that. I'm not saying I was a very good journalist, but at least you had to ask questions and be interested in everything, and sort of a dilettante of sorts. And that's, I think there's a lot of professional satisfaction in the legislature to that regard. And then, and then of course the kind of being, again, like what I talked about campaigning, just being able to know a part of a city as deeply as you can. And I still am I'm still learning, right? There's still so much I have to know about my own district, our city, and there are more people to meet and to spend more time with, and who have a lot of wisdom to impart. That has been like really rewarding.
Well, we delve into some policy things that are passionate and important to you. How has the experience been? Because one of the things, listen, I, as you know, spent many years up there as a staffer, and was fortunate enough to work with a pretty reasonable guy who knew you had to work on both sides of the aisle, especially when it comes to Philadelphia. And I know Representative Isaacson know this because she worked with them. Her predecessor, the late Mike O'Brien, who we all miss, got that same thing. How has that experience been dealing with the bipartisanship that is, whether it's fortunate or unfortunate? And I always love those calls when I'll talk to Mary, and she'll say things like, well, if it wasn't for your caucus again, we would ... And we laugh, but I get it. How have you found that, and how have you find your way past that to try to get some productive things done?
Well, so I think it's, everyone tells me that it's kind of the partisanship is sort of worse than it's ever been, and I Rep. Isaacson, you can speak to this. I can't, to some degree. I mean, because I just have to kind of, my day zero was, was January 2021, and the day I was sworn in, they refused to seat a duly elected senator in Western Pennsylvania, Jim Brewster, on some spurious argument about what about outstanding votes and the way it had been counted in one county versus another. Every court had upheld his victory. Then they subsequently upheld it. And so that was a crazy day, right? They just refused, just a person who was elected, they refused to seat him. We didn't vote for the president pro tem, most of us on the Democratic side. That doesn't happen that often, in my understanding. So I was inaugurated in this kind of, or inducted in this spirit of total partisanship. That said, and I think there are issues that we will continue to divide on, and correctly, right? And we have to hold our line on voting rights, on reproductive rights and freedoms, on gun control, and anti-violence initiatives. All these things that we there are lines drawn, and we tend to kind of find ourselves in the same positions. I'm the minority chair of the Urban Affairs and Housing Committee, which is a position I sought. I was very proud to be able to have that. I work with Senator Joe Pittman, who represents Indiana and Armstrong counties. And we divide on a lot of issues, but housing is actually one of the ones that I find that we can find a lot of common ground. And so we've worked on, and some small business initiatives. So one of the first things we did in the committee, together in committee, was amend a micro enterprise loan initiative that was started in the House, made its way to our committee in the Senate. We amended it to make it friendlier to minority-owned businesses, to make it truly for small businesses. Worked very well and calmly with with our committee to get that amendment through. It was, we passed it without any fuss. And so that was like a first taste of oh, there are things that, just through these committee structures and through certain issues, we can find some common ground. And so we've introduced legislation in the last 2 weeks called the Whole Home Repairs Act. It came out, I guess, about two or 3 weeks ago, actually kind of toured it around the state in Philadelphia, Lancaster, Reading, Allentown. So 2 Republican-led Senate districts, 2 obviously Democratic Senate districts, Reading and Philly. And where the current representative of Allentown, Pat Brown, is the sponsor, the majority chair of appropriations. We have 3 other Republicans signed on to it, all the Senate Democrats. It is considered an issue that is widely understood, that we need to fund home repairs and coordinate all the existing home programs across the state, and put people to work doing it. And that's what the bill proposes to do through the introduction of a fund. It's well understood in rural and urban and suburban parts of the state, so it feels intuitive. So, I'm not saying that bill will pass or get adopted as such, but it's gotten further, and it's gotten without, purely on the merits. We've just gone to people and been like, what do you think of this legislation? We'd love to talk to you about it. And people have said, we like it and we'll support it. And so this doesn't happen with everything. It's not I think it could happen way more. I mean, there's no question about that, but I think I didn't want to do this my whole life. I'm trying to make sure that we accomplish something while we're here. And so we're pushing very hard for it, and doing so both internally to the legislature while also building grassroots efforts in districts across the state with partner legislators and organizations to try to build public pressure for it as well.
No, and we love hearing that, because we know how bills like what you're talking about, obviously, how hard they are to pass, but when there's something tangible that can come back and help the people of your district, it's a great thing. And one of the things that I was immediately struck by, both in getting to know you and your staff, listen, we're in charge of a business district, and most of it small businesses. And it was great to see how aligned and attentive you immediately were, especially with the pandemic immediately hitting, to keep them open and keep them working. And it sounds like, from doing your background, that's right in line with what you believe in.
Yeah, I mean, I just know that in particular, the hospitality industry and the restaurant business, but I mean, small businesses generally, they're not easy to run. They have really small margins. People don't get paid enough. I mean, I think that there's structural things to solve about the payment. I mean, about how, what a minimum wage and tipped wages and the like, that's for sure. But I mean, we had a number of emergency measures and pioneered efforts, as in cities across this country, but certainly in Philadelphia, to find ways to keep restaurants and small businesses open through the adoption of streeteries, outdoor dining, and the like. And I thought that was enormously successful. It transformed not just restaurants, but it transformed our urban environment in many respects. It transformed the way we interact with certain streets, with what we can do with them, creating more street life. I mean, that's actually common in a number of other cities outside this country. And I think we learned that under duress. And there are a lot of things that we learned under duress, I think, with regards to rental assistance and things like, just general kinds of supports. This was one of them. And I was really, we wanted to make sure that we supported that, and we're in regular touch with the industry to support it in Harrisburg. And Rep. Isaacson was doing the same. We were both in touch. Our offices were both in touch with Councilmember Dom when they were working on their legislation. And so it's enormously important to me. And and just as frankly as a resident, as someone who participates in the public life of this city, who eats out, who like goes to who shops the commercial corridors. I mean, it's very important to have thriving commercial corridors. We're not lucky to have many great ones, and we also have many that we need a lot of help. I also represent, at least until for the time being, I represent Kensington between Allegheny and Lehigh, and so we've also, which has suffered from the drug overdose epidemic, from a lack of affordable housing, from the damages to businesses for post uprising, and it requires a lot of support. And so we've been trying to support state investment in that corridor as well. And so there are other major challenges, but yes, I do feel very passionately about the hospitality industry and wanting to support it, and the owners and the workers in it.
No, it goes without saying, but I should say how much we appreciate you and all that you've done for us. You two represented it, but we're going to get to you. Last couple questions, Senator. Again, thanks for the time. What are some of your legislative agendas as we sit here today, finishing March of 2022, hopefully moving out of the pandemic finally?
So, I mentioned one of them, which is, I would say is our biggest initiative, which is this major, what I consider to be a pretty significant housing initiative, the Whole Home Repairs Act. And it would, really, we don't have a housing line item in the budget. We have a housing finance agency, but we don't have budget hearings about affordable housing, or even about we didn't this year about the agency. We don't talk enough about how many housing supports we need. We had, despite what we went through in the last 2 years with, waves of evictions, waves of people, losing their homes, and even for people who were able to keep their homes, the stress put on our built environment. And so this would there are 280,000 units across the state of Pennsylvania, housing units that have major issues with leaky roofs, plumbing, and then also the lack of people, their ability to, they have unremediated lead, people can't age in place. If they want supports for that, this would fund that. It would make sure that for the existing housing programs that we have advocacy and dedicated staff and coordination. And it would fund workforce development stipends so that people would be put to work in these jobs of repairing and preserving homes. Those are, green jobs, right? When we talk, I think green jobs can actually be a kind of like abstract notion, but this, I think, is not it's something that we already do, and we need to do more of it. And these are good jobs for people going into the trade. So that's, I think, our biggest push and initiative, and we want to have dedicated funding adopted in this budget cycle. Now, we've also worked, I think a number of different housing initiatives have been our biggest push, but this is the largest. In addition, I'd say that we've worked on, I'll just name two other things. We have worked on labor legislation, and we're probably going to be working on legislation, or rolling out legislation in the next couple of months, to help get rights for gig economy workers in our state. That would actually help guarantee the status of employee rights and sick days, paid time off, et cetera, to people who drive cars for Uber and Lyft or DoorDash or what have you, who need supports and who don't otherwise enjoy that status. And we've just worked on a number of related pieces of labor legislation, stopping wage theft by subcontractors in the construction industry. And then, I've taken up something that my predecessor actually championed, and which is along with Senator Saval, and there's House companion legislation. I believe Representative Frankel is maybe the lead sponsor on it, to end. It's currently legal right now to discriminate in many counties or municipalities across the state against people for gender orientation or sexual identity in housing and public accommodation and workplaces. In other words, you can be fired for whom you love or who you are. And so we've taken up legislation to end that discrimination. We have every Democrat signed on. And I think we have a lot of today's Trans Day of Visibility, International Trans Day of Visibility. We have a lot of anti-trans legislation coming through our legislature, a lot of anti-LGBTQ legislation coming through our legislature and across the country. And we need to make clear what it is that we stand for, and what our Commonwealth and the people of our Commonwealth deserve, whoever they are. So I think that's another thing that we will continue to fight for, and I know that Rep. Isaacson is a huge fighter in that as well.
And I think this is a good time. We're going to, first of all, Senator, I have some questions for the both of you together at the end. If people want to find out more about what you're doing, about maybe how to get more involved in some of that affordable housing initiatives that you're doing, how can they best reach you?
So you can definitely visit our website, PASenatorSaval.com. There's actually a page for the legislation, that affordable housing legislation, called it's the Whole Home Repairs Act. Again, so it would be PASenatorSaval.com/whole home repairs. You can sign on as a co-sponsor, as a kind of resident, as a Commonwealth resident co-sponsor to the legislation, and you can tell your own housing story or why you would be supporting it. And we have dozens and dozens of people signing up, and organizational support. So we'd welcome that. And we have 2 offices. We have one in Kensington, actually quite close to Frankfurt Avenue, on Germantown Avenue, Germantown just north of Girard Street, and then a larger office in South Philadelphia on 6th Street, 6th and Washington. So we would welcome people to visit. You can find us on social media at Senator Saval on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. The staff has been threatening to put me on TikTok, but so that may happen. But I don't encourage that.
You have a face for it.
The face for TikTok. Yes, I don't know if that's a compliment.
It's a compliment. Trust me.
Good. Okay. But thank you. Yeah, we would welcome engagement, support, questions.
Senator, thanks for everything. Thanks for all you do for us, and hope you don't mind staying put for a few minutes.
Of course, not at all. Yeah.
We want to bring on now our good friend, Representative Mary Isaacson. Representative, thanks for waiting patiently.
Sure. I'm just so known for my patience.
Yes. And by the way, you only made one face when I was talking about my old caucus, so you're doing great. Mary, Representative Isaacson, I realized prior to this that we've known each other 16 years when we were both floating around as staffers up there in Harrisburg. And it's wonderful now that and we have her as our state representative. So thanks for the time today, Representative. I want to go through a little bit of your background as well, because you've been in the game a little bit longer, even though I guess you were elected in 2019, is that right? 2018. Tell us a little bit about what led you to coming to work with our old friend, Representative O'Brien.
I actually worked in the private sector prior to working for my predecessor. I did zoning and land use. I was a coordinator of a department and a law firm. So when he got elected, we had some issues going on along the waterfront with casinos coming in. So some of my expertise in land use came in handy, and I was lucky enough to land the job with him, and then get to know Harrisburg. And it's quite the eye-opener, as I told Senator Saval when he was coming in. It's very easy. We can be very congenial face-to-face when we're not talking any priorities of either caucus, but certainly when things get brought up, it can get quite nasty out there. As I like to kid around, you all live here in the People's Republic of Philadelphia, and you're attached to an entirely different state. So, but that's our job, to make sure that your quality of life is here and it's kept, and we have to keep the home rule charter in place so that we can govern ourselves here in Philadelphia, because I have a lot of colleagues who would be more than happy to come in and impose their will upon us. So that's our job, and our both Philadelphia delegations in both the House and the Senate to maintain that. And luckily, we have a governor's mansion right now that helps us along the way.
And I'm saving the Philadelphia questions for the both of you at the end, because
Okay.
it is a sad and unique experience, really, for in both sides of what the rest of the state thinks of our city. So you are doing yeoman's work. Obviously, all those years you worked with Representative O'Brien, you certainly got to see it all, both from a constituent point of view, both in the neighborhood and legislatively. How would you say, I mean, it's certainly, though you don't look at it, it's a long time to have been.
I was very
seeing all
young.
this. What's that?
I was very young.
You still are. How would you say, from what you've seen, and we'll start both in the district and in Harrisburg, the climate's changed since you arrived on the scene, fresh face, and now you're the dazzling young pepper pot we have representing us?
The district has transformed, and I moved to Northern Liberties at a time when the old Schmitz Brewery was still standing. And there was these three guys who came and bought in a corner bar that was abandoned, kind of, and they renovated it and opened it up, and it still stands as one of the best restaurants in Philadelphia, and it's called the Standard Tap. And they also went on, and as the neighborhoods were changing in this district, they've moved in the restaurant scene, the tourism scene, and certainly the age range that reside here in my part of the 175th has evolved. We have a much younger population, and that's because of the investments that were made in making great entertainment destination corridors, such as yours, and in Northern Liberties. And I also have South Street and Old City and Chinatown and all these wonderful destination places, is because of the investments that certainly people in your membership and all of the community surrounding it have put into it to make it. And the dedication that you do every day makes it a thriving area. And so I'm very proud to still live here 25 years later, and having come here right out of, infantile school. But it's certainly changed. And every neighborhood I have watched over my time as staff, as a resident, and now as a representative, we watch the growing pains for the people who have been here from generation after generation to the new people moving in, and everyone has to learn to live together. And that's not always easy. There's difficulty in it with regard to how people view things, whether it's parking or street traffic, or even the fooderies that we've been talking about. There's always growing pains with all of that, and that's our job to listen and help, because everybody needs to learn to exist together within the district and move together and make sure that we're all thriving and everybody's thriving, both the residents and the businesses. In Harrisburg, it's a whole different story.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, do you have the most business improvement districts in your district than any other rep? Because you have
in a House district, probably, yeah.
Yeah, you have quite a few.
I know I have the most liquor licenses, which is why I serve on the liquor committee.
I remember those days well.
I was gonna say, it came in handy during the pandemic, didn't it?
Yes, it did, and we thank you. I know Paul does as well. But that's one of the unique things when you talk about the way things change, and you have almost the push-pull of residential and then business development. And one of the things I'm going to give the representative well-earned praise is, obviously you can't please everyone. That's just not possible. But you do take that extra time, no matter how long it takes, to listen. Mm-hmm. And while that seems very simple, I want to give you that credit, because that's a lot of hours in a day to make sure people feel heard. But how have you felt that has helped you legislate?
Well, you should always listen to the people who give you the honor of this job, because it is an honor to be able to do the public service. And everybody has been going through this pandemic, their own experience, and it's changed everybody. And I came in, as an elected, as opposed to a staffer over the years, I walked right into a pandemic. And between the hospitals that I have in the district, with all the doctors and nurses who were our front line, trying to educate children, and all the teachers that we have, trying to make sure society moves forward and we're not losing a generation any more than we, have had to have a slide back with regard to this pandemic, but also to keeping the businesses open. And let me tell you something, when we got that cocktails to go, it was like people came out of their houses, and the problem was I kind of had to say to people, you're supposed to take them to go
Take them home.
It's not, let's have a drink party on the street, because we haven't seen each other in a couple months. But we certainly made sure that everybody was able to try and flourish and recover as much as we could, because the drinking on the street is not a good thing, because that goes to the residents who have to live around it.
That's a good way to close.
And making sure that their quality of lives are not inhibited while we try and make sure that we have economic recovery for the restaurants as we go forward. And who knows, perhaps that's those senators that Nikil has to deal with will finally get back to drinks to go. Right now they're holding it hostage for leverage for some other bad legislation, but you never know what you can possibly get for.
What?
Now you asked about Harrisburg, and Harrisburg is,
let's talk about
changed. It certainly is different than when your former boss was there. John Taylor, you could work with and cut a deal, and we would not all walk home with everything we wanted, but everybody would have a parting gift. Those days are over. The rhetoric you see on the federal level, it certainly plays itself out in Harrisburg every single day. I'll never forget, one of my colleagues told me that he didn't understand what I didn't understand, that COVID was just God's way of culling the herd. And I said, well, we believe in science in my district. Go get a vaccine and put a mask on. So it's certainly a different attitude. I don't think that 24-hour news cycles and social media has helped this, as many people live in their own vacuums and use that as their news source rather than legitimate reporting. But that's where we do find ourselves. The only good thing is that, sooner or later we have certain responsibilities, and like passing a budget is one of them. So come the end of June, everyone seems to get their act together enough to get some stuff done.
No, that's great. And kind of leading to, certainly people knew you, obviously. You had been a staffer for several years. How did you find it changed at all when you finally became, you're the person in the seat now? And how they treated you, and also I get
to say what I want now. I only answer to
we
the
are
voters.
recording.
I don't care. I tell my constituents all the time, I'm your big loudmouth that you elected, and they seem to like it. So, because they know that I'm going to open up my mouth and fight for them. But that's certainly, when I was a staffer, it was more of an advisory role, and now I have to answer to my big advisor there, who's here joining us today, my chief of staff, Samantha Pearson, who many people know because she is extremely,
she's awesome.
Yes, one of the most competent people we have working in politics. And I make sure that I do listen and answer to everybody who calls. And I try and represent our values out in Harrisburg from the district.
One thing before we get into some policy, how did it, certainly legislating up in Harrisburg certainly changed how you did it with the pandemic. How were you able to manage that to continuously ensure that you were protecting your constituents back here?
Well, the House of Representatives has been the land of the maskless since the pandemic started. We have been in session constantly throughout. They allowed for remote voting, but if you were remotely voting, you were not allowed to participate. So I'm proud to say that I have never missed a day, a committee hearing or anything else. I have a perfect voting record and everything. Because I went out and I participated, and when they were trying to deal with schools and they trying to deal with restaurants and hospital funding and everything else, I was one of the only people that was there to be the loudmouth voice and call it out and try and get things amended in, which is how I was able to get the cocktails to go and amend it in. And we've tried to work it out in that sense. The Senate operates a little differently. They actually let people participate, but that in the House of Representatives, you're not allowed. You can log on to the Zoom, but you're muted. So it's really, you have to have and if you're gonna have a voice, you got to go be a loudmouth. And so I've gone and done that, and happy to.
No, and we're glad you are. And it kind of leads us to, certainly you've been a very zealous advocate on issues of education, affordable health care, common sense gun legislation, as the senator brought out, LGBT rights. I guess the question is, as you sit here now in 2022, where are your focuses? And I know you have many, and what you'd love to get done up in Harrisburg, and where you hope to go.
Charter school reform.
Tell us about that.
They're defunding the public education system. We haven't changed the law in 25 years. The funding formula makes it impossible for us to fairly fund and make sure the resources are directed where they need to go. Philadelphia alone is not only the largest school district, it's also the second largest school district, because the amount of charter schools that the Philadelphia school district has to run is the second largest school district in Pennsylvania. It is larger than Pittsburgh's. So you have a big troubling fiscal problem, and I'm glad to be a loudmouth about it. I hope I want you guys, you might have gotten a couple mailers from the Commonwealth Foundation who doesn't like me being a loudmouth about charter schools recently. And I wear it as a badge of honor, because we have a constitutional obligation to fund charters, to fund the public school district. Charter schools, we have some good charter schools. I'm not saying they're all bad, but certainly cyber charter schools and the charter school funding is making it impossible, and you're about to get property taxes raised, and we're going to have this going on across the Commonwealth. I was fighting in the education committee this week over a voucher bill. But education is one of my major focuses. I'm the only Philadelphian on the education committee in the House. And that, and the environmental resources and energy committee I'm also on, and we're constantly fighting what they lovingly call overregulation, and I call trying to keep your water pure and clean, and some air that you can breathe without breathing in toxins. But that's a philosophical dispute between my colleagues and I. But those are the things that I work on mostly. I've been working on a local level. We got a big problem with catalytic converter theft. And I have 2 bills that we introduced with regard to it. And I was happy to get a commitment from the Republican chair of one of the committees to get it voted out. So, and that was because he knows me from all my years as staff. So those relationships last a long time when you can work on the other side of the aisle. And hopefully we can get some laws put into place that we could start tampering down on some of these rings that are operating, stealing people's catalytic converters, and also increasing the penalties for the precious metals that they're stealing them for. So we're getting those added to the Title 18, which is the criminal code, so that there are some ramifications to it for deterrent purposes. So that's one of the things I've been working on this year.
Well, listen, that I know we would love, because we are in constant conversations all the time with the 26th district about what can we do, and even to try to get even our garages here to, attach ID numbers in them, whatever. So we appreciate that work you're doing.
You'll appreciate that it's amending the scrap metal law.
I remember that. That was one of the last things I worked on.
I know, that's why I brought it up.
So I want to get back to the charter school because I've always
Yes.
found this fascinating. And so I remember this as a staffer. Every year around August, we would get in our district office, especially in Bridesburg, just a parade of parents begging us to get their kid into a charter school. And, and knowing a little bit about the budgetary stuff, I haven't looked in a while, but I think
It hasn't changed.
the Commonwealth of PA, I think, funds half of Philadelphia's education, which is more than any other county.
No, we don't, we're not at half. They've increased it every budgetary cycle under Governor Wolf, but we're certainly not at half yet. Which is why that's the shame of it, is because regardless of what a charter school spends to educate a student, and certainly a cyber charter school that does not have a brick and mortar building, nor the teaching staff to have to deal with, or the support staff, the paraprofessionals, nurses, everything else, they get the same funding per pupil that the school district for their students to attend the public school that deals with the collective bargaining agreements, the paraprofessionals, the support staff, plus the aging infrastructure of the buildings and all the repairs. And what the total per pupil amount that the school district comes up with each year it's going to spend on a student, that charter school, if that child goes to a charter school, that amount of money gets taken out of the school district budget and goes to that charter school, regardless of whether that charter school is spending that full amount of money. And they are under no obligation to spend that full amount of money on that student, which is why it becomes corporate education.
Because they don't often do that, spend.
No, they don't. And a lot of the results are quite evident.
I know we could spend hours.
Yes, I could spend. You could talk to me all night about public education.
But and listen, I'm a public school graduate, and it's certainly changed from 1980 when I got out. How do we help them? And I know we're talking in very generalities now because of time.
Well, regardless of whether you have a child in the public school system,
which I do,
or not, I understand. It affects you. One, it's your property tax. As I said, we just heard the mayor's budget and reassessments are coming. And certainly a lot of that's going to fall on this district. I understand that. But I think that the people in this district don't have a problem as long as there's results and that we have good schools and we're educating society, because certainly that makes every area in which you live in a good and prosperous area and have more people who want to live here and not leave it. So it's in everybody's best interest to have a fully funded, well-educated system here in Philadelphia. It's how you attract businesses, not just the small businesses that are in your corridor, but also the big businesses that we do rely upon here, the corporations that employ people, as well as, hospitals. You want to convince a great surgeon and doctor to come here with all their research money so that we can do things like figure out how to get a vaccine in less than 12 months of a pandemic. You need to have an attractive package to offer them to come here. They just don't do it out of the goodness of their hearts. So we need to make sure that we are having accountability, and we need to reform the charter laws after 25 years to fully reflect the education system that we now know and have full evidence of that's existing, and that the flaws in it right now. Of course, that's problematic because then we get to politics. And everybody loves charters who live in the rest of the state because they don't have the charters there. It's all Philadelphia. There's very few.
That's a good lead in.
Yes.
So I know where we are. I want to make conscious of both of your time. So now we're going to get to the open portion for the two of you. And Representative, you so eloquently alluded to it with the People's Republic of Philadelphia. And I remember when my boss and mentor, Representative Taylor, retired. And they're gracious enough at that point to get a chance to give a goodbye speech. And he dedicated a good portion of it to cautioning fellow members about their, I want to say bias or venom in some cases against the city of Philadelphia, because I think that does go a long way. And I want to get both of your takes on that, how that adds to the challenge. Is that true still?
Yes.
And how does that add to the challenges of what you both do? Representative, you brought it. We're going to start with you on that.
It certainly is a challenge. I had a colleague from, I believe she's from Berks County, and she asked, what would the founding fathers think of Philadelphia now in the state it's in? And, you know, and I said, what, being a thriving city that all these hundreds of years later is still the economic engine for the rest of this Commonwealth that you reap the benefits of out in on your farm. And so those are unfortunately, you have that kind of adversarial conversation that you have to kind of tamper down, where we all know I would like to have said some much stronger choice words. At some point, I need to get to 102 to get a vote get something passed. And so sometimes you have to tamper it down and make people understand that they do need us as much as I might need their vote.
Senator, how have you found that in your time in the Senate?
I mean, you know, what Representative Isaacson is saying is accurate to my experience in terms of the kind of use of Philadelphia as a punching bag, you know, overwhelmingly by people who of course don't live here, you know, and it comes up in budget conversations. You know, the kind of reference to the city is somehow being, you know, dramatically worse than other parts of the country, and you know, the other parts of the state, and we all are quite believe in the city, and actually the city is growing, and it's part of a growing region, and people want to move to Philadelphia. It's great. It's a city, people should move to Philadelphia, and they do, right? It's like an incredible, which isn't to say that there aren't like deep, you know, issues that we're all trying to solve here. I'm just saying that, but in terms of our pride in the city, it's merited. The thing that I would say is that I have found some, I don't know if success is the right word, but just some way to bridge a sense of this, you know, this kind of like this, that there's this divide between this major, you know, metropolis and like other parts of the Commonwealth that are truer or more real places, I think, because there are just insofar as we can decide that there are you find issues that where Philadelphia is not unique, or it doesn't, you know, it's not some kind of outlier, but is in fact holds things in common with other parts of the Commonwealth. I find that can be a success, like a helpful, like legislative conversation. So I'm not to keep harping on this issue, but it is very much on my mind. The housing issue is one of them. Like the fact is that we have an aging housing stock, not just in Philadelphia, but across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We have the rent burdens in the state of Pennsylvania are the same, whether you live in a rural district, urban district, or suburban district. People have the same kinds of affordability issues. They have the same issues with home repairs. I had some, Rep. Isaacson, I don't know if they were this, you had visitors recently, but we had some visitors from the Farm Bureau, or on behalf, you know, part of the Farm Bureau from Columbia County in my office recently. And in addition to agricultural issues, we started talking about housing issues. And they're like, oh yeah, weatherization, we have trouble accessing weatherization because we have a lot of old homes, and they have, you know, they need repairs, and we can't afford the repairs. So that means we can't do the repairs, we can't get our home weatherized, and we start to lose our homes, and we have this cycle of abandonment, displacement, blight is often the terminology used. And that's just a different, we're talking about rural farm country here. So to the extent that I've you know, every place in Pennsylvania is getting hotter and wetter over the next, you know, 50 years, whether, you know, the sense of what the sources are, or how we attack the sources of climate change are obviously things that we divide on quite, you know, pretty strenuously. But I would say that the consequences of it are widely felt. And so, you know, what it actually is hugely important, you know, and the consequences of energy burdens in our housing stock, how do we reduce them? I mean, to the extent that we can find those issues, I find that that is a helpful, that has been helpful, and it's been possible. Is it getting worse? Is it more difficult? I fully accept that could be true. But I feel like we have to, you have to be creative, and you have to strive, and you have to find those things, and you have to find ways to bridge those gaps. And I know that the rep has done that.
Two more questions, Senator. We'll start with you. You kind of let in, both of you had made references to the budget. And certainly this is now budget season. I know every elected official's favorite time of year. What can you tell us from certainly the Senate end on priorities and how what's being talked about will affect the city of Philadelphia?
Starting with
yes,
yeah. So absolutely. I mean, the governor's budget, as it did in the last year, and I think maybe even perhaps more aggressively this year, has like an enormous, or I wouldn't say enormous, a necessary, I should retract, the necessary spend on education. The Representative Isaacson highlighted this. We have, some years it's the most, in many years at least close to the most unequal funding structure for education in the country. It is the subject of a major trial in Commonwealth Court that concluded recently that would, that alleged that, I think correctly, that this was unconstitutional, racially discriminatory. We underfund some of our largest districts and we and have it heavily rely on property taxes. So this would start to change that picture by funding much more of our school infrastructure, or schools rather, through a fair funding formula. Which again, there was a fair funding formula that was adopted on a bipartisan basis several years ago. Of course, it is not all funding; it is only new funding. It doesn't dramatically change the picture, but it exists, and so there is an understanding of what would be fair for districts across the Commonwealth, Republican and Democratic. I think we need to be spending money, some of this budget money, on our school infrastructure. That is a big conversation. We have schools in our districts that are, have unremediated lead, exposed asbestos, or that are often closed for those reasons, that have where roofs collapse. I mean, this is not just true in Philadelphia. This is true in McKeesport. This is true in Erie. This is true all over the place. So I think that we need to also understand that the school infrastructure issue is one that we have the money to solve. And I'll just get to this. I should have led with this, but we have a projected budget surplus, even with this some of the spend that the governor is proposing, of $6 billion. It's going through June. We've been having revenues coming in over estimate, thanks to the enormous federal stimulus that has helped our economy jumpstart. And we have several, $2 billion in American Rescue Plan dollars. There is a lot of public bluster about the desire not to spend this, that we need to save it for a rainy day. From the Republican side, we should be careful about this surplus. We obviously, on our side, I think, have strong desires to invest this money because it would return, that investments on education return in people staying here, like Representative Isaacson was saying. So I also think that, as we've had with this housing conversation, people also know in their districts that there is this need to spend, and this money would be well spent and be used in productive ways. So I really hope that, on education, and of course I think so on housing, but I think on a number of related issues, that we would be finding ways to spend on infrastructure, on education, on things that would return the investment.
Thanks, Senator. Representative, same question for you in the House.
Well, I work in the House of the Loons. So there's what the governor has requested, and there's what they're going to, since all budget bills, they originate out of the House. So the Republican and Appropriations Committee will be producing a budget relatively soon and be the bare bones start negotiation. I think that we're getting, I'm starting to see bubble up a little fly in the ointment of everyone's plans, because if the federal government comes in and says, that American Rescue Fund money that you haven't spent, you now have to spend it on COVID stuff, and you can't keep it in a rainy day fund, it's going to change the dynamic. The question is, what is COVID spending? And definitions and what things can be spent on are always creative writing in Harrisburg. So we shall certainly see where they come with that. But certainly education funding, the governor has proposed more money for the environment, especially for DEP and DCNR, as we learned how important our state parks are and outdoor spaces for all the public to use. So I'm very happy that he's finally making an investment in that rather than flatlining it. But certainly there's going to be lots of interesting things that pop up. Again, charter school reform is out there, but that's going to be, unfortunately, I was going to go into earlier the politics of it, and those that don't want charter school reform certainly want to put their thumb on the scale with regard to funding of elections. And that's going to dictate how far and what we can do with regard to those reforms. But hopefully we'll get that done during the budget also, because that will help our education funding. But we do have a surplus, and we have the money in the rainy day fund. That's the American Rescue Act money. But again, I have a feeling that we're about to be told by the federal government we must spend it, in which case we're going to all end up being very creative writers.
Last question I have, and before we get to that, Representative, I didn't ask how people can get in touch with you in your office.
RepMaryIsaacson.com. And my chief of staff is going to be so proud of me that I took out a thing. So from all my Twitter handle, my Facebook and Instagram is Rep Mary Isaacson, at Rep Mary Isaacson also.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Senator.
And of course, she's putting it all in the chat.
Last question, for as much as state legislatures you can comment, certainly, Representative, you talked a little bit about it with the catalytic converters, but crime has certainly become, it's always an issue, but it's become certainly more of one, and certainly public safety concerns throughout the Commonwealth, not just here, have really risen. Are there are any thoughts from either or both of you of things that we can be looking into, or the state should be looking into to try to help that?
Well,
I know it's a broad question.
No, look, Philadelphia, again, you get to govern yourself. So that's why you have your own police department and you fund it through the city. Certainly there's plenty of grants out there that we could assist with, including one that comes from the casinos with regard to safety measures, whether it's from cameras or funding through the DA's office. There's all sorts of avenues that we could help the city on from the state level. You know, and statewide, we're in a precarious position because of gas prices. Everybody wants to cut the gasoline tax, but people seem to forget that the gas tax funds the state police. So you get into a quandary that you need to make sure that we're not cutting so much, so because that gas tax also funds the roadways. So the safety of those is of the utmost importance for everyone who has to travel on them to get to work. But that we also are going to have to revisit the Transportation Act. I think it's Act 84, and maybe figure out a different way and re-envision how we can go about that so that we can fund the state police, so that we can keep communities around the Commonwealth safe, but not necessarily be making it so that people can't even get in their car and drive to work.
Thank you, Representative. Senator, anything you want to add to that?
So, I think that the rep mentioned the grant making to anti-violence initiatives. I mean, that actually is a kind of major initiative that at least on the Senate side, Senator Haywood spearheaded in last year, and we were able to secure, I believe, about $30 million. Is that right, Rep. Isaacson, in the budget last year? And there's a renewed ask and a renewed proposal to add that funding this year from the governor. I think the Senate Democrats are seeking 100 million. I now forget the exact number that the government proposed, but that actually, I mean, the kind of community-based anti-violence initiatives are significant. We have a number of great kind of community organizations that do good work in Philadelphia, like the NOMO Foundation, for example, which is their offices on North and South Broad Street. And there's, just to name one, which I think work closely with young people, with with elders in the community to actually to bring people together in anti-violence initiatives all around. But I also feel like we should be funding things like the root causes that attack the root causes of all of this. I mean, we saw violence increase not just in Philadelphia, and you mentioned not just, and frankly, not just across the Commonwealth, but across the country. And this is, this has any number of different causes. It's the fact that we had schools closed for a long period of time, the fact that we a lot of our recreation centers, a lot of our public infrastructure has suffered for many years. I mean, this is not to to criticize the actual actions that we took that were necessary social distancing measures, I think, during an incredibly time, but just that they have had effects, and they've had effects across the country. There are things that, the funding that we give to parks, to recreation centers, to our public infrastructure all around, to the things that fund our quality of life, are actually things that are anti-violence measures. If we have a vibrant street life, as we learned long ago, actually, from Jane Jacobs and other people who study cities, like that actually creates an infrastructure of anti-violence and anti-crime. And I know I've harped on this for a long time, but housing is another component, right? There was a study done by the University of Pennsylvania in the last year, which focused on Philadelphia's existing basic systems repair program. If you repair one home on a block, it can reduce violence by 22% on that block. That's a single home, and that's actually just not even a huge amount of money. So it's not surprising, right? You actually invest in communities and infrastructure and in the stability of a particular block, you will save the kind of the community feeling in that block and be a violence prevention initiative. So, I mean, we really should be attacking the root causes of this. Education and funding is, of course, the lack of it is another root cause. So I just feel like we have the program in place. It is investment and stabilization of our communities. We need to fight for it, and we have the money.
Thank you, Senator. Before we let our team go, is there any questions from any of our guests today who joined? Paul looks like he's thinking of a question. You're on mute. There you go.
I guess for Mary or Senator, I guess I was kind of wondering about how the connection or the overlay works with PennDOT and public transportation, thinking that primarily, like from my experience as a neighborhood builder and somebody who wants to create life in neighborhoods, we have a very different vision of public safety in terms of what our expectations for being able to walk down the street or ride bicycles, for instance. So I wonder, what does it look like in terms of the overlay for the vision for public transportation and PennDOT general vision for highways or whatever?
Well, and in all full disclosure, my husband works for PennDOT.
Right.
But PennDOT and public transportation are kind of two separate matters, but they go hand in hand. Certainly in the Southeast region, we have SEPTA, which runs the public transportation system, but they work in conjunction with PennDOT with regard to the moving ebbs and flows and different routes that are taken on certainly the different streets. I mean, 2nd Street through Northern Liberties, 2nd Street's it's a state highway. So it's Delaware Avenue. So they have jurisdiction issues. So they work together, but and they try to evolve together, shall we say. I think the big difference is that SEPTA works a little bit more in real time, where you have, with regard to PennDOT and roads and bridges and engineering for the safety of those, it's a lot longer build out and engineering and planning. So trying to stick something in because it's evolved becomes difficult, but not completely obtainable. I mean, look, we've talked about putting the cap on I-95, and I think it was 2015 or 2016, and here we are in 2022, and it's still there, but we still have yet to start the construction. And that was an add-on in a 25-year plan. So you could see it was able to be adapted, but it still has taken so many years. They still have to do all the engineering for it. So where SEPTA is moving people around on a daily basis and is a lot more adaptable for something that evolves or happens, PennDOT, with regard to their budget and construction, is not as flexible. But they certainly have discretionary funding to try and assist making sure that things are going in real time. Hopefully I said that in a.
Yeah, I guess that's my question. Yeah, sounds great. I appreciate your answer. And of course, Chris's expertise.
Yeah, I have to live with it.
I mean, the other thing I'd say, I mean, I really appreciate that both you and the senator have like some similar, areas in terms of like, affordable like housing, and then the public schools. And then I also think that as a bridge thing for the rest of the Commonwealth, I like the public spaces and the parks are really great things to do. And when we have so much great public space in Philadelphia, we should advertise it to the rest of the Commonwealth, so they, I think have, are able to have a sense of pride about Philadelphia the way they should. But I like that those three areas are important to both of you guys. It's great.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Anything else, gang? I think we've come to that time. So I want to thank Senator Saval, Representative Mary Isaacson, for not just joining us tonight and all of your comments and information, but all that you do for us each and every day. We know how hard it is that what you do, and we're very thankful that we have both of you doing it for us. So thank you. Try to go enjoy some time with your family, Senator. I saw one of your young assistants was in the room with you, so
He was feeding
I
you.
know it's that time.
Yeah, it was.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, guys. We're going to be
Thank you.
posting this video on our weekly email newsletter tomorrow, also on social media, and we will make sure to send both the representative and senator links if they would like to use those as well.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Have a great night, everyone. Thank
Guys.
you.
See you, Mary.